When we initially planned the conference, we had planned on this part of the program a speaker from the UK who was going to talk about a 5-country study that had been done around apprenticeship, and Canada was one of those 5 countries. And unfortunately, at the last moment, he had to cancel for medical reasons. But this is one of the reasons that I am so grateful to our panelists today, who came together really on extremely short notice to share the perspectives of their members and the work of their organizations. So, and it's a bit of a reunion for this group. Panelists participated on Minister Jason Kenney's study tour on innovative approaches to skills training back in March, returning with their own ideas about what there is to learn from apprenticeship approaches in Germany and the UK. Their interest in the tour, I think, reflects the concerns of and the challenges of their members in terms of skill shortages, particularly in the skilled trades. And we get a better sense today, I hope, of their advocacy and policy work in these areas. And I'm pleased to introduce to my immediate left, Sarah Anson-Cartwright, Director of Skills Policy with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Joe Blomeley, Senior Associate with the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. Chris Smiley, Senior Advisor, Government Relations and Public Affairs at Canadian Building Trades. And Sean Reid, Vice President, Federal and Ontario from Progressive Contractors Association of Canada. And I think perhaps we'll start this morning by asking each of you to share the degree to which your members are talking about skill shortages, and do you have any sense of the degree to which they're engaged in apprenticeship training and some initiatives and programs perhaps that you're working on in Canada on those issues? Sarah, you want to?
I could speak at length on this topic. At the Canadian Chamber, you know, we're the largest business association, so we cover the gamut. And I have to say, we've been calling attention to skills shortages, especially since 2012. Finding people with the right skills is the #1 priority for business. We've been saying this continuously because there's been a bit of pushback, as some of you may have noticed, around the notion of skills shortages. And I think what's important, it's what's happening on the ground and the issue of how we look at what's needed by employers. So, you know, the demands of the major resource projects, of the construction sector across the board, skilled trades really needs particular attention, and we've been hearing that from our members consistently these last few years. And they're looking at what they need for the current labor market, as well as looking ahead for tomorrow, because we can see increasing numbers of certified journey persons are poised to retire or retiring. So it really is about planning ahead as well as meeting today's needs. And as a member once said, let's stop fighting over the welders and start creating more. And it really is about that type of mindset that's taking root amongst many of the employers. Now, I think we have to look at how large employers have been able to tackle this challenge. You know, when you're a large employer like Syncrude, you can require your contractors and your suppliers to have certain ratios of apprentices. So that's a nice market mechanism to try and encourage the supply, the uptake of apprentices amongst employers. And large employers can go to colleges and create supply there as per their needs. But when we look at the numbers of apprentices that are actually in small employers, small business, it's about 3/4 of apprentices currently. So we have to think in public policy terms, what do employers generally need, but what do small employers who are right now carrying most of the apprentices, what do they need to be able to take that role on, grow that role? How do we get other employers? So we're about policy advocacy at the Canadian Chamber. We're looking essentially at what more can be done for employers to increase their role, to increase their engagement with apprentices, to help apprentices complete, to get to the end. There's lots of supports for apprentices, less so on the employer side, and we're also looking at mobility, because that's a critical piece of the skilled trades and of the opportunity for people to be able to move to where the jobs are. That's really where our advocacy is focused at present. So I'll stop there. Let others join.
Well, for those of you who don't know, the Canadian Council of Chief Executives represents 150 of the CEOs from among Canada's largest companies. So we represent a cross-section of the Canadian economy, ranging from everything from oil and gas to financial services to manufacturing to agriculture. And as Sarah mentioned, one of the key issues that continually comes up amongst our members is the issue of skill shortages. We surveyed our members in the fall of 2013, and while we didn't find a national skill shortage, we did see serious sectoral, occupational, and regional shortages. And one of the key areas the members brought up was the skilled trades, particularly Red Seal credentialed tradespeople. So it's become a key driving force in the advocacy work that we're doing right now as part of our Taking Action for Canada initiative, which John Manley, my president and CEO, launched in November of 2013. We've been doing a lot of work right now in experiential learning, cooperative education, and as part of that, apprenticeships. One of the papers we recently commissioned as part of this initiative by Dr. Bob Lerman from American University looked at the issue of apprenticeship, and in his recommendations advocated expanding apprenticeships, increasing the amount of occupations that could be covered under apprenticeships, suggested better support for apprentices, especially when they did their in-class learning, and called for stronger dissemination. And it was interesting to hear Mark Breslow speak about non-cognitive or soft skills in his last presentation, because that's another key part of what we're doing right now. Our survey showed when we asked our members what skills they're looking for in new recruits, by and large, soft skills were what they're looking for. And I've heard directly from some of our members and their VPs of HR that said, you know what, we need welders. We certainly need welders or heavy equipment operators, but what we'd like to see is that at some point maybe in their career they can transition into management positions. And to transition into those management positions, they need a better suite of soft skills. So it was a very good point by Mr. Breslow that that's something that should be considered continuously in any kind of education effort with apprenticeships. But before, I'll move it along to Chris in a second, but a big part of our initiative right now is having an honest and open conversation about what's working and what isn't working in the Canadian education and the skills training system. So we're open to having conversations, finding ways our members can work with folks in this room. We do represent the large employer community, so they do have significant resources in terms of investing in apprenticeship programs. But there is more that they can do. As we'll discuss when we talk about the Germany portion of the trip, the Canadian employment community does tend to be a little passive in terms of skills development when compared to some, I'm being generous. But I'm happy we're having this conversation. A great part of the trip was getting to know everybody around here and beginning a dialogue, and I hope we can continue as we move forward.
And I would encourage when we go out and we finish just going across, I'll encourage any questions from the audience, because I think it's a really interesting concept around the idea of expanding apprenticeships into other occupations. We hear that come up over and over again, and I don't think that I generally hear a lot of support for that within the Canadian apprenticeship community, but that's not to say it's not something that's on the table. Mm-hmm. So it's an important area to provide some feedback on, and we'd be interested in hearing some views from the floor on that. Chris?
Thanks very much. Joe, that's kind of how the trip went. Joe talked a lot, and the rest of us waited for our turns to speak. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity, Sarah. Look, we're at a crossroads, like Mr. Breslin said this morning. The enormous economic opportunity that's before Canada and the demographic changes that are happening, and I would say also still reluctance of employers to take on apprentices. If I can jump right into the Germany thing really quickly before everyone else speaks on my points. The key thing I saw when we were overseas was, both in England and in Germany, was that employers are there from the beginning. So you don't have anyone involved in training unless there's an employer at the end willing to hire. It isn't training for the hope of finding a job. It's training for employers who've already said yes. And I think that was a key learning that, I don't know, I think we all sort of saw that. And when we talked to the students, and I don't want to steal anyone's thunder, but when we talked to the students, they said, I'm an employee of Bechtel. I know I'm going to be working for Bechtel when I'm done my training at this Northeast London training school. Because Bechtel is there involved in the community college. They're training 50 or 60 people right now to go to Australia. Those are the kinds of practical things, I think, which we could easily bring back to Canada. In any event, in my universe, in the building trades, apprenticeship is sort of what we do. Training is what we do. Close to $250 million a year we spend on training. We have 95,000 apprentices in the system right now today. We could submit a list and take a look at it. But so at the end of the day, we're concerned about two things for apprenticeship training: the current stock that we have and future stock. So current stock, what are we doing? We tried to figure out what the number one barrier was for people moving through, besides financial. That's a long-term issue that we're hoping to work with policymakers and some of these other stakeholders on the panel with for these young people. The second most important barrier to moving through an apprenticeship program is essential skills. So folks in Canada, as we all know, it's a slow motion through the apprenticeship system. We have a sluggish graduation rate. We started a pilot project, and we just got funding from Minister Kenney's office, or from HRSDC, to do a literacy and essential skills pilot in Saskatchewan and parts of Ontario. So what we're doing is going through our membership lists, who's in the apprentice program right now, who's struggling, who can't do the basic things that they need to do in order to move on, who can't take the test, and we're getting them literacy and numeracy training right then and there. And so those are the practical things we're doing with current stock. With future stock, we have a new program called Journeyman Inc., which is basically it's a promotional program where we're reaching out to high schools and to young women across Canada through social media, et cetera, like Mr. Breslin was talking about, where we're trying to get people involved and interested in a career in our trades. Look, less than 2, maybe 3% of the construction workforce are women. That's 51% of the population of Canada. So we need to do a better job of promoting those things, those small things which we can impact with the future stock. So let's look at new groups we can recruit. And employers need to step up to make it right for them. Employers need to actually want to hire these people. They have to have policies in place to do it. I can rag on these guys later, but I'll pass this along.
No, fair enough. And just so that you know, in your kits that you received when you were checking in, your delegate bags, there is an article in there about the initiative you were talking about with the Journeyman Inc. kit. So there's a little bit more background on that and how that's intended to engage women. But Sean.
Okay, just quickly, the PCA, for those of you who are not familiar with it, we represent construction employers whose members are primarily unionized by the CLAC. Our operations are in Ontario and through Western Canada. We our members specialize in infrastructure construction, and also about 40% of all resource construction in BC and Alberta is done by our members. So we're living that challenge of finding skilled trades workers in particularly in Western Canada right now. A few things that we're focused on right now is building our own internal training capacity. We are also both in Ontario as well as in Western Canada. We've got a new welding training center in Edmonton, for example, that we're excited about there. Also attracting more workers into the trades, another key area through partnerships both with First Nations groups, women in construction groups, but also one that we're excited about is our is our High School to Hard Hats program that we're running right now as a pilot in Alberta with our labor partner, CLAC. And there's some good opportunity there. And one last thing I would just say is that we've also initiated a coaching and mentoring program for smaller employers in our sector among other things, on apprenticeship development that we're excited about. I think the one other thing I'll just add to what's been said is and I realize we're maybe getting ahead of where we're going, but my number one takeaway from the Germany experience was, at the national level, the national policy level, there is far more that unites all of our different organizations and different industries than divides us. It's, elbows are pointier at the provincial level and the local level, but, Chris and I are practically family.
He doesn't look that happy about that.
But no, I really, and I took that away as a real positive, that there is a lot of work we can, sorry buddy, that we can do together.
No, and you know what? I do agree, because I think that as much as the trip was about looking at what the model was like in Germany or the UK, I certainly got a lot more value out of the trip, I think, in some of the side conversations. And I think that one of those things was that to go into an employer in Germany and hear what the system was, or to hear from the Chambers of Commerce in Germany, the most interesting part then was to turn around and say, okay, but how would that work in Canada? How would that work in our context? Mm-hmm. And I think that comes back down to, the number one thing that I hear across the country is how important employer engagement is. At the end of the day, we need continuous work hours. Apprentices need to be employed. They need to have those first opportunities, and then they need to have continuing, ongoing opportunities. And I guess that, having employer associations, and, you're working closely with your members, they're saying there are skill shortages. To what degree do you think employers are willing to step up and be an active part of that process, of making that available? So, one of the things I think that we heard was, in both Germany and the UK, the employer was making the commitment from day one to completion. There was no, okay, well, that contract's come to an end, and so now we're going to lay you off, and we may or may not call you back, and then we're sending our apprentices to go and find another job. So go knock on some more doors and try and find more of your hours. And it's constantly moving them out of jobs rather than keeping them fully employed. And I wonder, do you get a sense that there's any appetite for that kind of relationship with employers in Canada? I mean, this is not necessarily a question for all of you, but are you getting a sense of that?
So I think what we need to look at when we look at the German situation and compare, which is great, by comparison, there's so much we can talk about amongst ourselves. So we look at Germany and we see it's an all-in proposition. Okay, all employers, we ask them, why are you taking on apprentices? Well, the other guy does, so I do too, Now, that's not to say they don't have shortfalls, they do. They are concerned about employer uptake. Not everyone who could be taking apprentices is doing so, and some of the same issues that we have. But it all starts because it's all so integrated there. So I'm wondering how we cultivate more of that all-in mentality, that mindset. Now, when I think of a chamber's role in Germany, it is so different because membership is obligatory. If we had every business had to become a member of ours, and then we had the public tasks that were required by law, as they do in Germany, including setting the exams for the apprentices, it goes, you see how integrated it is, right? Here, we're very piecemeal. So the question is, who are the players that could come together and better knit that kind of integrated approach and cultivate more of an all-in proposition? I think there's willingness. It's easier, one would think it's easier for larger employers, and yet when we look at the composition of our economy, when we look at the composition of where the skilled trades are located and the employer base being so much in the small firms, we have to think about, really strongly what needs and supports needed,
Sarah, can I just jump in here?
required there. Yeah.
So you're talking about small firms, and most firms in construction are small. And so in Germany, what we saw was the Chamber of Commerce, or somebody, it doesn't necessarily have to be them, take the lead in organizing for those small firms. So we saw, so you don't have the problem where people say, well, we're a small company, we don't have the infrastructure for that. There is an overarching group that takes care of that. In Germany, it's the Chamber. In Canada, it's not, because we're not set up like that. But I think the gentleman from I can't remember if it was Berlin or the Stuttgart Chamber of Commerce, stood up and said, if you want results, you must have rules, and you must have regulations, and you must have a process for this system to work. And so if we're serious, and we're serious about having some sort of structure in place, you have to have at least the values of what they have. You have to have employers, you have to have educators, you have to have labor unions, and you have to have educators, all sitting on a panel. Look, everywhere we went in Germany, they had, right down to the local city, they had a council where all four of those people sat on to determine the local economy and who was getting trained where. Somebody has to take the lead. And so the chamber here doesn't do that sort of thing. Maybe it's Joe's group that takes a look at that in partnership with the other players. Yeah. But the key thing was the conversations that were happening across those two countries. Those aren't happening here. We don't have educators, employers, labor unions, and others sitting down deciding. Nobody's deciding. Everyone's sort of throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks. What we need is to move forward.
It was interesting. One of the key takeaways I had was the incredibly important role large firms played in underpinning the German system. You had, the Volkswagens of the world, the Steels, the German telecoms, really playing an active role in bringing their industry together and ensuring that dialogue was regular and that it was collaborative with other levels of government and other stakeholders. One of the things we heard a lot from German companies was that their role in the apprenticeship or vocational training system, in their opinion, was a societal obligation, that they felt it was something that was necessary, it was for the good. I mean, obviously it takes some of the risk out of recruitment for them, but it was for the good of the country, so to speak. We don't have that natural culture here, so I think companies are tentative when it comes to launching into this kind of dialogue, but I do get a sense, and Sarah, you could probably speak to this too, I do get a sense from at least the large employment community that there's a movement towards wanting to do something like this, to become more proactive in the education system, that reach in a little deeper. And I think you're going to start seeing stuff coming about through pilot projects with individual companies, but you're also going to see industry sectors maybe begin the discussion about setting up a deeper form of a relationship with the post-secondary community.
Well, coming back, and I guess then the question is, are there things that the apprenticeship community can be doing? People who are committed to the idea of apprenticeship and apprenticeship training, are there ways to, what can they do to encourage the employers? What can they do to say we're willing to collaborate and maybe overcome some of your challenges? But Sean, I'll let you.
Well, I think supporting the extent that we can all be supporting innovation. I think to Joe's point, there's an onus on industry groups to take a lead in thinking innovatively about the area that we really took away was employer consortia, especially for those smaller businesses, and how can we actually create innovative consortia. And quite frankly, to be honest, the building trades have got some of the model there established. It's sort of inherent in the way that you guys are structured, but there's something that other industry groups can be taking to find ways of collaborative, sharing resources, sharing knowledge, but applying it in innovative ways to drive more apprenticeship. Just one final thought on that is, in our view, the areas where innovation is most desirable in the apprenticeship arena is in that perception barrier. That one of the numbers that the gentleman put up about, I think it was 32% of parents view skilled trades as a good career path.
They would encourage their kids.
That's crazy. And of course, one of the big takeaways from Germany was this parity of esteem concept that people were talking about, where you've got 50 to 60% of the workforce are in apprenticeships, and there's no stigma attached to that. We need to be thinking innovatively about how to advance and change the brand of skilled trades. And that's, I think, something that employer partners can be doing together.
Well, we want to hear any questions that you might have for this panel. So we have the 2 mics if anybody wants to ask a question.
And Sarah, in the meantime, if I could just highlight some of the things that are different about Germany versus Canada, because I think it's indicative of what we've been discussing. You know, the fact they don't, interestingly, they have countrywide exams, but like us, Germany's a federation, so the provinces are responsible for the regulation of apprentices. And so they found a way to meld, you know, to kind of meld what we have with our Red Seal with that responsibility at the lander level. And I think that's worth delving into more, because it seems to serve them very well. Every employer would say, you know, I know what an electrician is, regardless of where he apprenticed, he is an electrician, because it's the national exams, the same certification across the board. So that serves them well. They don't have any journeyman to apprentice ratio. They leave it to the company to decide what's appropriate. And the companies are highly regulated, obviously, in how they train. And actually, you know, part of the perception of apprenticeships in Germany is there are far more occupations apprenticeable, right? So it's not just about the skilled trades as it is in Canada. So that may feed into the fact that there's more acceptance of apprenticeship, because dual training is basically 2/3 of young people's education is through this dual training track, which we call apprenticeship.
I know this gentleman has a question, but I'm just going to hop in just really quickly. One of the things that was, when we went to the Federal Ministry of Education and Training, when we asked what underpinned the system, I guess it was the deputy minister equivalent, said dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. For this to work, you have to be in constant conversation. You can't have silos between different levels of the education sector, between different levels of business, between different levels of government. So they meet on a regular, their version is CMEC, the Council of Ministers of Education in Canada, who does a lot of work on apprenticeships, meets 4 times a year. The federal government's involved, which is not the case here in Canada. And they have several committees that also meet throughout the year. So it's a regular conversation. I think that's something the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum can bring to the table, having regular dialogue, bringing groups like ours together, and keeping the momentum from the Germany
Well,
trip
and
intact.
the one thing to think about, even though employers have a lot of flexibility, employers also have to open their doors to people who are going to come and say, are you doing a good job of training? If your apprentices don't pass the regular exams, then you are not qualified to teach within your company. So there's so much regulation on top of that. Joe?
Is it working?
No, it is, Joe.
You don't need a mic.
Hello. Started. You need the mic. Now it's on. Yep. Hello.
So guys.
Okay, well, I'll go with that in any case, right? Okay. So look, it's a comment first to the panel and on the previous presentation, which was really quite marvelous by Mark Breslin. Absolutely phenomenal.
Okay, now you're working.
Okay, good. Just have to. So what was coming through my mind in Mark's presentation and goes out there, of course, is the most sociological problem. The fact is that really we've got a problem with the birth rate everywhere in developing economies and what have you, and we need to do something about it, and we need to do something in Canada about that, but it's too late for most of that. But to the panel, as I'm noticing here, of course, we don't have government sitting up there, who's largely responsible for apprenticeships throughout Canada in the various provinces, and of course don't employ enough apprentices either, but they are somewhat responsible for the legislation that goes on for the delivery of apprenticeship and skills training across the country. And we spend a lot of time in Ontario here and in British Columbia, where I come from, and all across Canada, we're coming up with models and breaking them down and reviewing them again. And is it not a fact that we're spending a lot of time here, wasting time? We have some models that haven't worked out well, but we should be working within those models. And there should be legislation in there that compels employers to have apprentices. When I hear that Suncrude and people like that are big enough that they can demand that of their contractors, well, surely the bodies that can insist that employers are going to have apprentices are the government bodies and the agencies that the government authorise to deal with apprenticeship, delivery and training.
You'll have your time with government.
Can I?
Yeah.
Sarah, can I offer one thought? I agree with a lot was just said. One thing I will say is, again, I think the onus is on industry associations like our own to work with individual employers. I think, quite frankly, a lot of us in the association game are too busy trying to say what we think our members want to hear, and not enough on what is really right for their industry over the long term. And that's one of the reasons we've launched our coaching and advisory services program, is because it's really going to happen sort of one employer at a time at those lower levels, in our belief.
And I guess that's an interesting question to think about. Is now you're back. You've been able to put some of what you've been able to learn into the context of your own members and our country and how it works. And so what are you doing? What are you thinking since then in terms of how you take some of what you learned and apply it with your own members?
So I think the key point is the onus is on everyone in the room to talk to governments. It's not just up to governments. Sometimes governments give us bad policy, and governments with one stroke of the pen can change your business, can change your entire existence. So I think what needs to be done is a combination of the two. Your comments are valid, but it's incumbent on everybody who's in the system to go and talk to the provincial governments. When was the last time you sat down with the Deputy Minister of Training or Apprenticeship in your province? When was the last time you sent in a policy briefing? I mean, I sent in 3 last week to Kenney, Minister Kenney, sorry, I hope none of his people are in the room. But look, it's incumbent on us to tell them what we want. We can't sit around and wait. If we had sat around and waited for something like the Canada Job Grant, it would never have happened. But what did we do? Well, we thought about some things that might work for the economy, might work for training to help increase the number of people who move through a training program. So you submit ideas to the Department of Finance, and out comes the Job Grant. If stakeholders hadn't have done that, and if people in this room hadn't have talked about wanting new ways to deliver training, a new focus on training dollars, those things wouldn't have happened. And so it's incumbent on communicators, and it's incumbent upon policymakers like yourself to actually, I'll be frank, to do something and send in what you want to the people who can make decisions and put pressure on. That's where Joe comes in, right? I mean, no, but seriously, but it's incumbent on everyone in the room to tell governments what we want for our system. It's our system. It's not government's system. So,
and I think the federal government, for the most part, has been responsive. They did quite a bit on apprenticeships in the last budget. I think where the concern really is the provincial level, and ensuring that they work collaboratively together. Again, going back to the issue of silos, I mean, I think at the provincial level, that's a serious problem. Especially in terms of the education component. A lack of harmonization between different jurisdictions is a concern for employers, I can tell you that. But
well, and you're seeing the federal government put pressure on the provinces, right? And so everybody collectively, because at the end of the day, we do have a fragmented system, we got to work within it. I don't think there's ever going to be a national apprenticeship program, so we need to push the provincial governments to do what we need them to do. And the federal government's certainly doing it, so let's follow their lead.
I'd also like to put in a plug for research, for data, for what we call labor market information, but for what the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum does in terms of research. Without that, you know, for all our great ideas, we have to backstop it with what's the reality that makes this the right policy approach, or what's needed, where are the pain points, who are the types of employers who are not taking up apprentices relative to the areas where they could. And it's those types of research and data that are really critical to the advocacy work that we do. It's very helpful, so participate when you're asked and help us with your ideas as well. And as Chris said, let's collaborate. I mean, on my Human Resources Policy Committee at the Canadian Chamber, I have all the post-secondary institutions, their organizations represented. I have employers. I'd love to have the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. You know, we have 100 industry associations, as well as our corporate members, as well as our chamber members. So, well, okay, if you want to join, please. Because that allows us that comprehensive look. We got the supply and the demand side, and that's what helps us make good policy, because we're able to go into government and say, look, this was crafted with these viewpoints.
And I can see there's a lot of difficulty in putting forward policy in an area where you don't, it's not necessarily your area of expertise. So you need to be able to go and ask people, tell us what we should be doing and explain to us the way it is so that we're putting policies forward that make sense. I'll just go to a question from the floor.
Hi there, my name is Shirley, and I'm an HR professional who represents 3 provinces, actually, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and PEI. We are a tire company who hire apprentices in automotive and truck and transport. I guess I can go 2 sides as to why small employers are not involved, but I'd like to go to part of the reason why maybe the young are not interested or involved, and that there's lack of parent knowledge. And on the East Coast, it's because we don't have trade classes in our high schools anymore. I think a big part of it is that there's a lack of access and opportunity for our young youth and for our parents to even understand. I sit on the Automotive Sector Council in Nova Scotia as well, and I'm a PSSE member. I have 3 young girls actually that are in the next generation after 2000 that are going to be coming up. So I'm very heavily involved in essential skills, and that's part of it too. But I'm just wondering if that lack of mandatory shop class in our school systems is part of that problem. And as to the small employer, again, with my what I'm doing in the 3 provinces, is the smaller businesses, they don't understand apprenticeship. Even though they employ tradespeople, everybody is recruiting for a licensed technician, and I know what that's like, especially because we are logistically challenged. I have 12 locations in New Brunswick, and you know, in the big centers, yes, we have 3 and 4 stores, but when I'm dealing with Bathurst or Grand Falls or Woodstock, or if I'm dealing with New Glasgow and some in Yarmouth, I mean, some of those areas are very, very hard to recruit. And so again, you're looking for those licensed trade peoples, but those smaller companies out there don't understand apprenticeship. So I think we need to reach out and make, you know, I've sat at a lot of tables like, you know, anti-poverty initiatives, and I'm a workplace initiative, and I'm the only employer at the table. We're not going to get anywhere unless we get more of those employers at the table.
Thank you very much. Do any of you have any comments? Chris?
No, on the shop class issue, absolutely. I mean, finally, I think the rubber's hitting the road here, and there's realization. What we put asunder now, we've got to recreate. BC just put out its Skills for Jobs blueprint, a total reorientation, it seems, of their post-secondary education system and drilling back to high schools, recognizing they got to reinstate shop class and start to cultivate at that stage. I think Ontario's starting to do a little bit of that with some of their new programs and a dual credit approach. And so we're starting to see, but we really have to push on this, because there's been a shift away, and I think there's a realization it was not helpful.
Yeah. One of the interesting things in Doug George's report was the statutory obligation to inform students about all your career choices, not just the university route. And unfortunately, as a millennial myself, I remember my time in high school quite well, and they were pushing us into the university pipeline, right? Yeah. There was very little information. I was in school while shop classes were getting shut down. And there was very little information about the type of careers you could have in the skilled trades. And you know, my brother's an example. Unfortunately, spent 2 years in university, wasted a lot of money taking a Canadian history degree, and unfortunately,
although I'm sure that degree is a great degree.
He left and he went to Algonquin College and did television and broadcast and got a job right away. Right? But he was never pushed in that direction when he was in high school. And unfortunately, the K-12 system needs to do a much better job of talking about all the different career prospects that are available to students.
Sure. Chris, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just a quick thing. So back to your comment about the no shop classes. Elect governments that say they will put shop classes back in the curriculum. It goes back to the first gentleman's statements. Let's push governments to put shop classes back in. It's as simple as that. We're pushing the federal government to push the provincial governments on money they receive from the feds under the Canada Social Transfer to make that money contingent on providing vocational training. And so there's serious consideration at the government level, saying that 400 billion or whatever the heck the number is contingent upon provinces delivering curriculum that meets the demand of labor markets. That's the kind of stuff that makes sense. If you're a province and you don't deliver vocational training, you don't get the money. And so I know my provincial colleagues in the room won't like these comments, but how else are we going to make provinces move along the policy continuum?
Fair enough.
Just one more quick point. I agree with that, although I don't think we can wait for government on some of these things. Just the shop class comment too, cued a thought that we've been talking about, and we're going to put some pen to paper on, is we've lost the inherent dignity of the skilled trades when we talk about there's a meaning in building things and in manual work that our society has lost sight of. And if you haven't read Mark Crawford's book, Shop Class to Soulcraft, you're missing out. You got to read it. It's really excellent. And I think, not to get overly philosophical, but that we've got to re-inject that conversation into this dialogue.
Absolutely. Edith?
Yes, good day, everybody. I'm Edith Ferrier. I'm a plumber from the industrial and commercial institutional sector. And now I'm with the Ontario College of Trades as an enforcement officer. So earlier you remarked about it's incumbent upon policymakers at a provincial level. So the problem here is that we are competing against each other in provinces. So my question is, why not have a national apprenticeship program?
Do you have a thought about that? Well, obviously that's not the way it works right now, but we'll take that under advisement and go and talk to the province to see if we can rejig the Constitution.
Well, sorry, I'll just say one thing. I think the work that the federal government is doing on improvements to apprenticeship mobility is a part of having that, even if it's not one system, it operates as though it's one system with permeability. That should be the vision that we're working towards.
And this was Sarah's point. In Germany, there's a national strategy. Yeah. There's a national over body, but it's still being done within the provinces, across Germany. I mean, there's recognized that they have very different needs, very different industries, very different requirements of industry within each. But there's still a national strategy where we're all working toward the same goal. And I know that some of that work gets done here. It's just harder to see, and we're very spread out, 13 different jurisdictions, and that's complicated. Right. I'm sorry, I can't see who's at the mic, but I know someone's there.
It's Randy Fennell I'm from BC, Surrey, BC, and we work in the schools. I'm hearing a lot of the job training is sort of job-specific, employer-driven programs, and I just heard that Mark Breslin was saying that we're going to fail if we're looking for self-interest. We're going to lose tons of interest if we are trying to find apprentices to support jobs like Enbridge and LNG when they're being taught in schools that they want green jobs, and they don't really support that type of field. So we need to just be looking more, how do we get more green training to go along with these different apprenticeships and able to get the young people that's what they want to do involved.
Well, I would guess that there's a role there again for employers. The employers that are in the dialogue with the post-secondary institutions, I'm thinking of, for example, BCIT, because you're from BC. If there's a demand driven from the business community, then there'll be programs and there'll be hopefully some uptake through the training.
I think what would make that disconnect, I guess, a little easier is, I understand the issue is self-interest, and if it's like an Enbridge-led program, then yeah, you may have a problem attracting people because they're dealing with a serious corporate social responsibility problem right now. But if it's the industry itself together, a number of companies, including SMEs, developing programs with institutions, working with high schools, and I think you're better off. I think you're taking, again, a much more collaborative approach. It could be a broader set of skills that are being taught. It's not company specific, and I think you'd be in a better position at that point.
Keith?
Keith Poisson. I'm an apprentice coordinator from British Columbia. The government talks about the importance of apprenticeships. They don't hire them. Why would business want to hire them? Our own governments don't hire apprentices.
Do you hear
Federal
that
or
from,
provincial.
Do you hear that from your members? I mean, do you hear any feedback from business saying, well, if government's not hiring, then why are they trying to convince us to hire? Is that an
there's
issue?
an awareness, but I think Chris has got an interest here, wouldn't you, to see government in its, isn't there an interest in procurement, for example?
So the procurement, thanks, Sarah. The procurement model.
He's doing your job.
Yeah, thank you. I better pay attention here. So governments don't directly hire, and I'm not contradicting what you're saying, but governments are the largest purchaser of construction, in our industry, they're the largest purchaser of construction services in the country. So there are governments, sort of a smorgasbord across Canada, that have requirements of their contractors. So the government of BC or the government of Ontario is never going to hire a welder because all of the work is subbed out to a construction company or a construction manager. But the policies that those governments have in dealing with those contractors makes a difference. So if government X or Y says you must hire Z 1, 2, and 3, then that gets done. So indirectly, governments do impact apprenticeship. And, you know, we had a lot of success in the last round of the federal budget, I guess 2 budgets ago in 2013, federally, saying that if there were federal dollars on an infrastructure project, I think we're spending 40 or 50 billion over the next 10 years on major infrastructure, then there's going to be some requirement, either voluntary or compulsory, they haven't decided, for apprentices to be on those job sites. So there has to be a policy there has to be a political will to do so. But governments do play a large role in apprenticeships, largest purchaser of construction outside of energy companies in the country.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that in terms of the federal infrastructure dollars, I think there was sort of backing away from we're not going to mandate or ask the provinces and municipalities to do that. We'll encourage, but when it's just federal procurement, there's some movement toward that as a starting point.
Yeah.
And there are also some provinces that are much more advanced. I know Manitoba actually requires bidders to have something that says we're engaged in the apprenticeship system. Did you have anything to say to that, Sean, or can we go to the next question? Cindy?
Thank you. Cindy Oliver, Federation of Post-Secondary Educators of British Columbia and member of the CAF board. I think one of the biggest problems with trades training and apprenticeship in our country is that it often becomes a political football because there is no national strategy for it. So that when provincial governments are elected, they do what they want to it, it may have no rhyme or reason, there may be best practices out there, but they don't always follow them. And a good example is the province that I'm from in British Columbia. And, you know, Sarah, you mentioned, there's this great new blueprint out there.
I know.
And
but what about the ITA? I know you're going to say this.
No, I'm sticking to the blueprint. You don't know what I'm going to say. No, this great new blueprint for re-engineering is the word, re-engineering post-secondary education. So perhaps on the surface it sounds like, wow, that's exciting, you know, the change and everything else. But it becomes concocted, or it has been concocted somewhere within government, within the Ministry of Advanced Education, without any input from stakeholder groups. One of the biggest stakeholder groups should be post-secondary educators, because those are the people that have to deliver it if there's something new out there, right? Never been consulted about it. So again, there's that political football. You know, is it best for trades training to go the route they want? I don't know, because it's very short on details and no one was consulted. So that's an extreme flaw in my view, because you cannot ever have the people in the room that you need to have to be able to talk about those things. The experts, actually, not just stakeholders, but the experts. And as I said, it becomes that on political whim. And I don't think that's any way to run an apprenticeship system, trades training, or frankly, any post-secondary education.
Thank you very much.
Well, I would just say, for some free advice here, I mean, it's just my sense is that if there's a blueprint out there, if the government's taken a decision that this is the approach it wants to take, Unfortunately, you know, if you weren't consulted in the lead up and there wasn't good counsel, that's passed. But going forward, is there scope to influence how they go about implementing this? And I would say that, you know, that's where your opening is, because it strikes me if they're re-engineering training and education, then all the educators have scope to participate and see some opportunity there.
Anyone else have any comments on that? We'll go to our next. I think we'll just take two more
and
questions.
It's not the first time, of course, the government will do something out of left field. much as Chris crafted what became the Canada Job Grant, the provinces were all caught unawares. Yeah. So we've all lived. We've all lived, well, you like to take credit, so we've all lived with the consequences of governments. It's what you do once they've taken that decision for whatever their political reason. And there is always opportunity, I think, to engage. So I wish you luck on that.
Okay, I think we only have time for a couple more questions, and I do see that we have a bit of a line, so we'll just go, we'll go through and see if we can get some comments and questions. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Erin Hay from Little New Brunswick. Question in regards to involvement and how to get different types of apprentices involved in the apprenticeship training. In New Brunswick right now, we have a program going on to support apprentices with learning disabilities, gaps in their literacy and numeracy, and that face other educational challenges. Just curious if from your experience, if they have different models of delivery, different models of assessment that maybe you could share with us, because that seems to be a challenge that we're facing. Learners and apprentices that have great kinesthetic strengths, manual strengths, are very mechanically inclined, and struggle a great deal with the format of the delivery of our programs, and also when it comes to the paper and pen examination. So just maybe some insight from our counterparts overseas.
Yeah, and you know what, I will actually tell you, that's one of the questions that I was asking is how companies are choosing their apprentices. And it's important to recognize that apprentices in both Germany and the UK were very young. So 16, 17, 18 years old was typical for entering an apprenticeship. So they're coming directly out of school. And when we asked the employers, how are you going about choosing these apprentices that you're making a 3 or a 4 year commitment to, they said, oh, we get the ones with the highest marks. So just to keep in mind, that's a very different way that we would go about thinking about apprenticeship in Canada. If you think about an average, the average age of a newly registering apprentice in Canada is in their mid-20s. They've been out of school for quite some time, and I don't think there are very many employers who are asking for their high school transcript to decide whether or not this apprentice would be better than that one. So I think that to a lesser degree, those companies have found that to be their problem. And because, like Sean's talking about with the parity of esteem, you do have your best students that are also seeking apprentices, so apprenticeships. So it's not as though what we're saying is if you couldn't cut it academically, then you should go into the trades, which I think leads to perhaps a more difficulty in the Canadian system. It leads to additional difficulties in terms of you have more apprentices who are less likely to have done really well in school, and therefore you would tend to have people with more learning problems than you would in a system where you're getting 16, 17-year-olds based on their marks.
Can I just jump in with one quick thing on that? I think that's a really great point, and an important part of the dialogue on completion rates that I know is going to be going on in this forum is what mechanism do we use to improve completion rates while still accommodating those who want to be in the skilled trades but are struggling with those areas, whether it's challenging the exam or literacy or some of those. How do we have a place for those people who are genuinely want to be in this world that we're in but are struggling without, but still drive completion rates at the same time?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
My turn, yay. Okay, so my name's Abigail Fulton. I'm with the BC Construction Association, so we're back to British Columbia again in our blueprint. I actually have a question about the UK, but before I get there, I'm going to do a shameless plug for an initiative that we have underway in British Columbia called Project Shop Class. as an industry, we're trying to lead the way in raising money to rebuild shop classes in BC. And it's a collaborative effort with the building trades, with government, with the industry training authority, but we're actually going out to industry and raising $9 million to help rebuild shop classes, because we believe that it is critically important to get into the high schools. And we believe that the youth of our province need the trades. So the best and brightest need the trades. And I challenge the other provinces to start up a similar initiative. Let's not wait for government to do it. We need to get in there and make a change. And in putting the focus on youth, what we hope for, and this is the challenge to post-secondaries and to government, is why the heck isn't a trade qualification the equivalent of an undergraduate degree? Because that'll change attitudes of parents, that'll change attitudes of kids. You can go straight from a qualified plumber into an MBA. Why not? They do it in Europe. But the question I have, which has to do with the UK, one of the other hats I wear is I go offshore to recruit workers. Don't kill me for that, please. One of the things I do when I go to other countries is I research and I find out what's going on with their apprenticeship system. And what I found in the UK, particularly in southern England, I got this in a pub in Manchester, so take it for what it's worth. Talking to a fellow who ran one of the biggest construction companies in southern part of England, and also sat on their construction industry training board. And his comment was, there's a huge crisis in the UK, particularly southern England. Apprenticeship is dying, and he pointed to two things. He said one of them is off-site construction, where everything's built in a manufacturing setting and they don't need the tradespeople. And the other one is that most large employers, there's no direct hire. They're all independent contractors, so nobody's training apprentices. And I'm wondering if you can comment on that.
Yeah, well, it is disheartening to hear those things. And it was actually kind of disheartening and somewhat familiar for us when we landed in the UK after being in Germany. You know, we went sort of from not quite one extreme to the other, but, you know, this great system that seemed to be working, albeit with lots of regulation, to something that was a lot more familiar. And in fact, I think the college that we visited, I felt a bit, disappointed or underwhelmed, yes, because the quality of the facilities was nowhere near what I've seen here. And so, you know, there's some of that. But those other points are obviously much more endemic to, you know, what's going on in the skilled trades and the sectors requiring them. I'm not familiar, but I will say they've got some real issues. Yeah. Thankfully, they've got a report that seems to be trying to get them back on track, and there's some good learnings for us there too. One of them was about vesting employers with funding and for the employers to decide how to train. That was the sticking one, of course. It was ceding a lot of responsibility in a different direction from
the Lerman paper we produced suggested that in one of his recommendations, that instead of leaving it up to the province to determine ratios and things like that, leave it up to the employers. I found the UK portion of the trip almost a cautionary tale of, like, you know, how things can get really bad. Like, you have generational unemployment in several regions in the UK, a poorly managed immigration system, including a poorly managed temporary foreign worker system there right now. And serious youth unemployment, and as a result, it's forced them to have a conversation and forced them to work together, forced them to develop these reports like the Doug Richards report. I hope we don't have to come to that in this country. I'm glad we're having conversations right now before we have, you know, serious troubles with not just our apprenticeship system. Like, I certainly hope our apprenticeship system's not going in that same direction that it's going in the UK. I think it's good that we're having these conversations, and the large employer community is waking up to this stuff, and we're looking to have a collaborative dialogue about how we work
And I
together.
do think the project shop class in BC is a really great model to look at, because it's not about waiting for ministries of education to come up with the money to replace equipment in shop classes. It's about industry saying, if we want to engage youth, we've got to give them the most up-to-date equipment. We've got to give them access to test this stuff in a school environment, and then those who like it will come with some hands-on skills?
Paul Booth used to be the Deputy Minister of Environment here and was also previously with Finance and Industry Canada, led a manufacturing study at the Richard Ivey School of Business where one of his recommendations to large and mid-sized companies in Ontario was to adopt a high school and provide them with equipment, work closely with them, and specifically focused on skilled trades. And so that's something we're seriously considering as we develop recommendations for our members.
Dave C. Suncor Energy, also a board member of the Ontario College of Trades as well as the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum. I guess the thing is I've been in maintenance in some capacity or in manufacturing. A big amount of that time was in maintenance before I moved into HR. The reality is everybody in this room is responsible, so there's a supply chain that feeds the manufacturing, and we're providing the supply chain of talent. And the reality is I think what we've lost sight of, it goes back to what I heard about sustainable industry engagement. We talk about collaboration, and it's that balance of supply and demand, and it is industry driven. It is not as up to government or education to solve, and you know, as we balance that supply demand, it's like a manufacturing process. We seem to be putting a lot of energy into high school, and we're ramping up input of the raw material, but we still don't have the engagements for sustainable employment. It takes 4 to 6 years to really complete your apprenticeship and certification. So when you think about the bottlenecks in the process, I think we really need to make sure we don't take our eye off the whole process by focusing just on one, because 50% completion today, where we are today, is not acceptable. And a lot of that is because the lack of sustainable employment, the lack of commitment to post-secondary pathways that lead to sustainable employment. We can't go to market looking for talent with 1 to 2 years notice. How we produce our numbers and share those numbers and what the demand is. So I think overall, if you think about the process, maybe that's a different way we need to come to the table and think about it. And I'm listening to Mark this morning and some of the change in how we work together and collaborate and think about this manufacturing process of talent, for this talent pool. Maybe it's an opportunity for us as I'm listening to this conversation, what you all learned over in Germany. And I don't think there was any surprises. It just reinforced maybe what we already knew.
That's why he's on the board. We've got an employer out there who's talking about sustainable employment. That's fantastic. Anyone have any reaction to that before we just take our last question?
Well, you know, I know we can't change the system and, you know, shift away from that employment model and apprentices as employees versus learners as they are in Germany. But they are learners, and there is the commitment by the employer, and it's a 3-year training to completion. You know, why have we got 4 to 6 years in hiring, firing? I mean, there are things that one wonders, couldn't we set some goals for ourselves, and then find the mechanisms to try and support and achieve them.
Not to turn this into a two-way conversation too much, but I think really when you say 3 years, realizing that when did they start their education was a lot earlier than what we're doing here. And we're getting better with dual credit and things like that, but it does come back to education.
Right.
But it's that supply going into commitment to actually providing sustainable employment to your completion. Doesn't mean I'm going to provide you a lifetime career in my company. It means I'm growing the pool, I'm feeding the pool, I'm making my commitment to that.
Yeah.
So I think you got to look at them in context,
Right.
not just that 3
Well,
years.
and the Canadian Chamber is looking at advocating more towards completion. What do employers need to help apprentices get to completion? There's a support already for 1st and 2nd year. What about getting them through 3rd and 4th year to completion? And there's always that notion of, well, once he gets his ticket, he's out of here. Well, we've got to figure out what will work against that mentality and help.
Okay, Gwyneth, we're gonna let you close it up.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Gwyneth Lauder, I'm a consultant in apprenticeship, and I'm currently working with the Canada West Foundation, doing a research project on apprenticeship completions and retention. So very timely for me. My question is directed at the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. The report that came out suggesting that we ramp up the number of apprenticeships in Canada, quite frankly, just baffled me. Right now, for every 100 apprentices that enter the system, only 50 come out the other end as graduates. If we ramp up the system, it's like putting twice as many people on a bridge that is not meant for it. We've got to improve those numbers first. We've got to figure out what we're getting in, why it's not happening. We've got to work with employers first and foremost to make sure that those apprentices are cared for, are nurtured, are taught, are given skills, that we quit talking about it as a negative thing, but rather this is the most wonderful way to learn a job. It does lead to a future that is fantastic. But if all we do is just say, oh, we need more. I looked at the Alberta numbers, and for 22,000 new apprentices every year, half of them don't make it. Right. That in 5 years, that's 55,000. Where's it going to end? Where are we going to end having people fail? It doesn't encourage employers to take apprentices knowing that for every 2 I bring in, one's going to fail.
Right. To answer the question, so the papers we commission as part of our initiative, they do not necessarily reflect the views of our organization itself. That is the author who put that out there. And I think he was taking a look at it from like a 30,000 foot level as opposed to down at a granular level. I would certainly agree with you in the sense that we do have a lot of things we have to fix on the margins in terms of improving completion rate, improving the in-class experience, what the fellow from Suncor was saying in terms of sustainable employment. I don't think the solution right now is just a massive expansion of the amount of positions available for apprentices. I do think he makes a really interesting point that when done right, an apprenticeship is an incredible way to give somebody some practical training. It takes some of the chance out of recruitment for companies because they get to kind of see whether the person can hit the ground running. And in that sense, I think the theoretical basis of why apprenticeships are such an interesting recruitment method is a useful tool in terms of applying it to other ways of recruitment. And so when he talked about expanding the apprenticeship program to other occupations, I think it didn't necessarily mean take the apprenticeship model we're using now and just put it into financial services and into manufacturing. It's take the theoretical basis of why an apprenticeship makes sense and apply it in a more flexible way. So we are seeing companies try this on a flexible kind of ad hoc basis with different post-secondary institutions. It's not necessarily replicating the current apprenticeship model for example, skilled trades, but it's utilizing some of the finer points of the better points of why an apprenticeship works.
Yeah, that on the job part of the training.
2 seconds, sir.
Let's make some final comments because I know we're cutting into the break, and that's the only reason I'm letting us go long anyway. No, go ahead.
So to answer your final question, we can bring new people into the system as long as we're backfilling with the training infrastructure behind it. So I agree with you, we don't want to stretch capacity, but as long as we're increasing the infrastructure and we're investing more in the system can take more as long as employers agree, educators agree, and we're moving people through. We have to backfill with the capacity. We have to get more employers to take them on. Quick thing, in Germany, what they do is they have roaming trainers. So instead of the journey person doing all the training, they have government-funded trainers in that trade who go around and train the young people and make sure they're getting the competencies they need. Those are the practical things that we could do in Canada pretty easily.
Fantastic. I would like to just thank our panelists. I know that we'll be going to a break, and I'm sure that they'll all be around for at least the next few minutes. So if you did have comments that you didn't have a chance to give, then feel free, come up and have a talk to them. And in the meantime, I will just thank them all very much for coming in at last moment and doing this with us.
For moderating that for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take a break now. For those of you heading